To close this 8th edition of Paris Climate Finance Day, please welcome the Governor of Banque de France, François Villeroy de Galhau.
Bonsoir, good evening. I will speak in English, but allow me some sentences in French to start with. Pour vous dire d'abord, cher Thierry, cher Arnaud, puis chers amis, le plaisir que j'ai à conclure ce Climate Finance Day, à m'y retrouver. J'arrive juste de Francfort, par le train, je tiens à le dire, et pas par l'avion, où il y avait un conseil des gouverneurs de la BCE, vous en avez peut-être vu les résultats. Je peux vous dire que nous sommes déterminés à combattre l'inflation, mais que nous gardons le cap du soutien à la transition climatique. Je vais y revenir dans un instant. Il se trouve que c'est ma 5e participation, et je vous remercie de votre fidélité. Et nous avons pris l'habitude, à l'occasion du Climate Finance Day, de rendre des comptes. Et je trouve que c'est un grand mérite de cette journée. On a pris des engagements, comment on les a tenus. Et si vous voulez bien, j'en viens là à la partie en anglais de mon discours. Just to say that it's my 5th participation, and it's an excellent opportunity to exert accountability. Let me start saying that central banks and supervisors are delivering what they promised. The Eurosystem is incorporating climate change into the ECB's monetary policy operations. We announced it last July. As supervisors, the French ACPR conducted the first pilot climate stress test in 2021, and we were followed by the ECB this year. Our NGFS, you are probably all familiar with NGFS, Network for Greening the Financial System, based in the Banque de France, has now an Asian chair, my colleague Ravi Menon from Singapore, and it has now more than 120 members. You will probably remember that we started 5 years ago with 8 members. Moreover, regarding our non-monetary portfolios, the Banque de France has already achieved the 2-degree objective. I am happy to announce tonight that we will now align with a 1.5-degree objective, starting with European equities before end of next year and completely by end of 25. That said, our accelerated pace is more than needed given the ever greater climate emergency. I don't need to be long, we are all aware, acute on this risk. Although the global warming is currently 1.1 degree, what we saw last summer, what we see this autumn, gives us a clear insight into what future will look like. Could look like. The most recent research suggests that the first global climate tipping points are likely to be crossed between 1.5 and 2 degrees. So all the phenomenon, collapse of the ice caps of Greenland and West Antarctica, abrupt melting of carbon-rich permafrost, and possibly the disappearance of a key current in the North Atlantic would have significant physical and economical consequences. Our stakeholders, private and public, are playing their part too. Yet, and this is my message tonight, our past progress, which exists without any doubt, induces new challenges. And I would like tonight to address 3 of them in a very operational and concrete way, 3 shifts, if you allow me. The first shift is from voluntary to mandatory disclosure. The second shift is from stress test, which I mentioned, to prudential requirements for financial institutions. And the third shift is in our collective governance of green finance in France, from individual commitments to an ecological planning framework. Let me start with disclosure. This week, ACPR and IMF published their third joint report in which we assess climate commitments published by French financial institutions. Together, we call for a swift bridging of the gap between the current level of disclosure and quickly upcoming regulatory requirements. In this field, as you know, Europe is leading the race. We drafted new regulations to make sustainability disclosure mandatory. And EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, with a strong involvement from Patrick de Cambourg, has accordingly developed draft standards. I don't need also to elaborate on CSRD topics, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. May I stress another progress? These European standards will include biodiversity and nature-related risk, where we must, some years later, follow the same roadmap as for climate. This is for Europe. But in the meantime, and this is also good news, also it creates a more complex situation. The newly born ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, has, thanks to Emmanuel Faber, another strong French contributor, published 2 draft standards. And as you know, the US SEC has also published a proposal on new climate-related requirements, which would, if adopted, I stress the if on the other side of the Atlantic, gradually come into force after 2024. These international standards are obviously welcome. Climate change is a global topic. And we cannot, let us look at it sincerely, we cannot, even if we wanted it, have a single standard. To give an obvious example, the European requirements are expected to be more advanced than others. But we collectively have to ensure that these standards are interoperable to the maximum extent. And this is hard technical work. What does it mean as a bottom line? When an entity complies with a set of requirements from any jurisdictions, say Europe, it should mean that it also automatically complies with the global baseline provided by ISSB. Hence, the current divergences between the major set of norms must be overcome. How can we work on that? And this is probably the most acute and practical challenge we have. None of these norms are carved in stone at this stage. We should use the time available to us to work towards convergence. I understand that EFRAG and ISSB are making together significant progress, notably in detailed definition. This is good news. I wish that we will reach full convergence by end of this year at the latest. But in parallel, let me also stress it, attention should not be only focused on European interoperability. Cooperation between US SEC and ISSB is as much needed. I come to the second shift from stress tests to capital requirements. The first assessment of climate risk by banks and insurers was carried out in the context of climate stress tests. As said, France and Europe were pioneers here. But another progress, many jurisdictions, I don't know if you know the figure, 36 at this stage, are now following the same road to test and learn with climate stress tests. The release last summer of 6 updated NGFS macro-financial scenarios will allow to have a common grammar for this stress test and will allow enhanced assessment. To complement this stress test, we will have a measure as faithful and comprehensive as possible if we rely on robust transition plans. And this is a new name of the game for financial institutions and for corporate at large. They are not only advocated by private sector initiatives, such as the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, they will also be required from banks in Europe under the forthcoming European CRD6. Sorry for these acronyms, which are not especially poetic, but they are efficient in banking regulation, and they are foreseen by other standards for corporates in general. This would allow, and this is a strong belief from us, this would allow for a dynamic, holistic, and risk-based approach, which, in my view, is far preferable to static and not risk-based green supporting factors or brown penalizing factor. But if we want to be ambitious, the question is how to operationalize this stress test and transition plan. In my view, the most international way forward is to integrate them into Basel capital requirements. To start with, in Pillar 2 on risk governance. If progress can be made, has been made, on both Pillar 2 and Pillar 3, Pillar 1, credit risk, still raises several issues. Its implementation, which could come at a later stage, will require standardized and usable data, which do not yet exist today, as well as the analytical capacity to disentangle the risk to be covered respectively by the supervisory and regulatory approaches. This brings me to finish with to the third shift I mentioned, what collective governance is best suited for green finance in France. The minister just mentioned it, and we all read about it. An ecological planning process is launched by the government this year. There were other contributions, and for sure, we need to initiate and sustain a collective momentum of transformation. And each of these three words is important: collective momentum and transformation. A momentum within the financial community itself, with all its diversity, as well as a momentum that brings together financial and economic players. Green finance is here to green the economy. Can I stress second the importance of building capacity and welcome all the courses and master's programs developed by French business schools and universities. But let me briefly convey a few personal convictions to build this strong and efficient collective governance. First, French influence in Europe is at least as decisive as a sound French governance. Je vais le redire, ne soyons pas trop franco-français. Even the best designed plans and initiatives in Paris are likely to miss their objectives if they remain circumscribed within our borders. French voices are needed in Europe. Let me stress it strongly tonight, with your professional associations, in your engagement with European authorities, in your exchanges with European peers. Second conviction, and I go a bit beyond regulation. We should elaborate, this is not that easy, the compatibility path between the present energy crisis linked to the war in Ukraine and the ecological transition. And we know there are short-term contradictions. Public support to households, public fiscal support to households and firms is understandable, but it should not foster energy demand. Can I mention something which has not been much discussed in France? Tiered pricing mechanism, tiered with Tier 1 and Tier 2, such as planned in the Netherlands and probably in Germany. They subsidize energy prices only up to a certain volume of consumption. The threshold can be the same for everyone, as decided in the Netherlands, or in proportion of past consumption, as considered in Germany, up to 80% of past consumption for households, or 70% for firms. The marginal tranche above this threshold remains at market prices, thus maintaining the incentive to reduce energy consumption. And let me add that we should obviously keep the long-term course of a higher carbon price. So we have a crisis, we have an emergency, let us remain consistent with the long-term course. Third conviction, a sound collective governance should go hand in hand with common sense, obviously. Let me give some examples. When it comes to reporting and disclosure, it is vital at end to clarify, unify, and apply common reference frameworks. Each company, each financial institution can no longer have its own favorite standard and referential. And this brings back to the EFRAG ISSB convergence I mentioned. Furthermore, beyond repeated commitments, we need concrete results, ex post. Finally, not too many public bodies and committees, but a stronger coordination and a stronger governance within the financial sector and within private firms, involving at the right level, I stress it also, people, institutions, and NGOs. What we need to deliver together requires efforts, time, and money, things that are too scarce to misuse them. If, and I stress the if again, if Paris and its financial ecosystem succeed there, I genuinely believe that they can be a driving force for Europe as a whole on green finance. Let me conclude with Henry Ford's words. Coming together is the beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. Where are we on climate change? There is still a long road ahead, but since December 15 and the Paris Agreement, since December 17 and the creation of NGFS, we have already come together and we are keeping together. The urgent task now is implementing governance at the international and national levels, as well as that of individual firms, to ensure that we indeed work together, aligned and in the same direction. In this task, you can rest assured as central bank and supervisor of our relentless commitment to fight climate change. Thank you very much.